Right, okay, so my name's Ian Davey and welcome to this morning's webinar. So this is a joint webinar between TBAT Innovation and Barclays with Gavin Smith that's on there as well. So just an introduction, my background is I'm background in production operations management, so not in video games, I can definitely tell you that, but you know, we are experts in understanding what is video games tax relief and who does it apply to and how does the process work. So that's what we're going to be presenting on this morning, giving you information as to find out whether it's relevant to what it is that you're doing in your own businesses. And then I'll be handing on over to Gavin Smith a bit later. So he is head of tech and media at Barclays, and he will be going through what support Barclays can offer to companies out there as well. So we'll start the presentation. Okay, so if I share my screen. Okay, so funding your innovation. So as I say, we're going to talk about video games tax relief. What is it? Who does it apply to? How do you access it? To try and give you an understanding of whether it's relevant to you as a business. So it's a scheme that has been around since 2014 from HMRC, and it's kind of run jointly between the British Film Institute, BFI, and HMRC. So it allows companies to access funding for the development of their games. Now that is retrospective funding, so you kind of have to spend the money first before you claim it back or get a tax credit from HMRC. Now, since its inception in 2014, there has been over £300 million handed out to companies in support of the video games that they're developing. So what we're talking about is Video Games Development Company. Now that is a company that is developing the game, and in the respect of what you can claim for, it has to be a British video game or a EEA, European Economic Area derived game. So the kind of British cultural test is a bit more expansive than just British. One of the important bits is this: when you start developing a game, you have to be so I'm just going to make sure that I've got my screen for if anybody else tries to join. Can't see the controls for admitting anybody. It has to be intended to supply. So when you're designing the game and developing the game, you have to have an intention to supply that to the market. So that's one of the fairly key bits. The other major bit is that you have to have a minimum of 25% of core expenditure that is being in the UK or European Economic Area. So that's really two important parts. So people waiting to join. All right. Okay, so they should be. Right, so the video games tax relief is actually a part of a wider range of creative industries tax relief, which applies to film and animation, high-end television, children's, theatre, orchestras, museums. We're not going to go through those. We're going to very much concentrate on the video games tax relief benefit today. So, what is a video games development company? So, a video games development company is the business that has the sole responsibility or the majority of responsibility for designing, producing, and testing the video game. You know, so they have to be actively engaged in actually orchestrating, managing, and procuring services to allow them to develop the game. and they will negotiate the contracts, they pay the rights. So they are very much in control of where that game is going and who is assisting in developing that game. So the important thing with the video games development company is there can only be one video games development company per game in the life of the game. Now that can be important when you're looking at investment, and sometimes investors like to take a cut of this. So and sometimes you're selling the game. If you're moving the company onto another company, they can't take over the VGDC role. It is only one company in the life of the game that can be the VGDC. So it's important to consider when who's claiming and when as part of the whole development of the game. So from the company eligibility, they have to be registered at Companies House. So that is either as a limited business, a PLC, or a CIC, community interest company, whereby each of those companies are liable for corporation tax charge. So they don't necessarily have to have paid any corporation tax. So you could be a very early stage company developing the video game, and you've never paid any corporation tax to HMRC, but you can still actually claim money back from them against the video games tax relief schemes. So you don't have to wait until you start paying corporation tax. So that's quite an important element. And the other important bit is that you can actually go back 2 years. So you don't have to dive into making a claim straight away. If you wanted to wait, or if you need to wait to decide what's going to happen with this game, then you have got time to be able to consider it. So from a video games itself, there has to be, so what's classed as a video game? So there are certain key features that would be expected. So there has to be an element of an uncertain outcome in developing the game itself. And this means that the player who is controlling the game has to have some control over the events or the actions that are happening in that game itself. So that's quite important. So they can meaningfully affect how that game plans out. Obviously, in a shoot me up game type game, that could be, well, actually, they should be able to win, or at some point they might be losing. So there's that uncertainty. It can include an ability to purchase. So, it's quite common in video games to have, purchase elements in it. And also sometimes companies will monetize their games through advertising. Now, I'll go on to advertising a little bit later on as well. But that's a common feature of how to monetize a free game. And as I said before, it has to be intended for supply. So there's some fairly prerequisites of what it has to happen within the game and the type of game it has to be. So for the game to be eligible, it must be certified as British or kind of an EEA content by the British Film Institute. So you can't apply for your tax credit or your reduced corporation tax bill until you have a certificate from the BFI. As I say, it has to be intended for supply to the general public. And having spent 25% of core costs in goods in the UK or EEA. I will take questions at the end if anybody's got some. So there are some specific exclusions as to what a video game is not. And if the game is related to gambling, betting, or lottery, that is not an eligible area for tax credits. For advertising. So if the game itself is for an advertising purpose, then that means that the game is not eligible. As I said earlier, you can use adverts within the game to monetize how you develop income for the game, but it can't be for the purpose of advertising something. Also for training purposes. So if you're looking at a company and they want to develop a gamification training scenario, because it's for training purposes, that's not eligible. And if you're not intending to supply the game to the public, then you can't claim the credit. And also it has to meet the PEGI game age rating. If it's pornographic, again, you can't claim. And a company is not eligible if the company is undertaking difficulty. So if there is some financial constraints within the business and it looks like it may not be a going concern going on, then you can't claim. There are also restrictions, so if you're a very large company, which is over 250 employees, then there are restrictions around, well, if you're as a business are eligible to claim the RDEC, which is the R&D expenditure credit, then you have to claim under RDEC rather than claiming video games. So there's lots and lots of restrictions about what can apply and what doesn't apply. And it's important to understand, before you kind of apply to BFI, whether you're going to be eligible for this or not. So from the point of view of what game platforms are available, then it can be pretty much, your game can go on any platform. So it can be all the recognized consoles, it can go onto mobile phones as apps, or it can be onto online gaming, which is obviously very popular these days. So it doesn't matter where your game is going, as long as it's intended for supply. Now, as part of the restrictions, you can't include the development of a platform for it to be played on. So if you want to design a game and have your own console, then the console development is not part of the game development itself. So that they are definitely two separate elements of what you are developing. So it has to be only the game cost development that can be applied into the tax credits. There's lots of eligible costs that can go in. So you can look at, well, actually the actors and the voice recordings and the cost of developing those voice recordings can go into the cost. Any audio and music that's developed specifically for the game, any animation development that is being put through. The design development costs are the core development of what's going through, and concept development costs at a certain stage, which I'll go on to in a short while, looking at the storyboarding and developing all that, right through to major testing of the game. And as I say, there's a minimum of 25% of all of those costs have to be within the UK or European Economic Area. And anything up to 100% is eligible, so anywhere between 25 and 100% can be utilised within the scheme. There's quite complex rules about what you can put in, what you can't put in. For example, if you've got an actor that does some recording in London and does some recording in San Francisco, then the recording cost within London is eligible. The recording cost in San Francisco is not. So therefore you have to do what they call a reasonable apportionment of costs against what is eligible and can go into the scheme. So it's important to understand where those costs are being paid to make sure that they are eligible. Now, obviously, we talked about the BFI cultural test. So the next couple of slides is going through what are the constituent elements of the BFI cultural test and certificate. Now, there are 4 sections, and each section has a number of points. Now, importantly, what you have to achieve in order for to achieve a BFI certificated game is to achieve 16 out of 31 points. So there's some other rules about what, if you're relying on different sections, which I'll go into in a little bit. But section A is around the cultural content. So, is the video game set in the UK or another EEA state, or the location cannot be determined? So this actually gives you a scale of points. So if you are over 75% of the game is set in UK or EEA, or undetermined, then you can get up to 74 points. If your game is 66% 3 points, 50% 2 points, 25% 1 point. So you can see how it develops. And the same with lead characters. So is the lead character or a proportion of the lead characters British or EEA games citizens or residents, or nationality species cannot be determined, which is kind of a bit of a coverall. But again, there's a sliding scale. So if you've got two of your three lead characters are UK or EEA, you can get 4 points, etc. So they all slide down. Video game based on British or EEA subject matter or underlying material can get up to 4 points. You know, original dialogue or voice over recorded mainly in the English language, or one of the 7 recognised UK languages, which are Welsh, Cornish, Scottish, Gaelic, Irish, Ulster Scots. So as long as it's in one of those languages, then you'll get those points. And again, that's a sliding scale. So if a proportion is in it, then you can get a proportion of points. Cultural contribution, section B, significant representation, reflection of British cultural heritage. So this is just reflecting on, is there a historical or contemporary element to the game that you're doing that reflects either British or EEA culture? Significant representation of British culture through novel and creative approach. So if you represent it in a novel way, and again, significant representation of British cultural diversity. So subject portrayal and other points affecting it. So less points available in that section, 4 points. The next 2 sections are looking at cultural. Section C, and there's potential 3 points, is really looking at who is developing the game. So section C and D is around the costs and who is developing the game. So section C looks at the conceptual development, storyboarding, programming, design. If it's a UK based or EEA based citizen, then that gives you 2 points. And again, the same with music recording, 1 point there. And again, with cultural practitioners, section D, up to 8 points. So if one of your 3 leads are, your major lead out of 3 people is UK or EEA, then you can gain a point against each one of those roles as part of the development cost that's going forward. And as I said, what you have to do is you have to achieve a minimum of 16 points across all these sections out of 31 that's available in order to achieve a BFI, a satisfactory BFI certificate. Now, it's important that as you are developing this game, that point score does not change, because it can affect your ability to claim video games tax relief if your points dip below 16. So if you initially apply and you get 16 points, but then you change the game in some way that means you're under 16 points, you can then no longer claim. And anything you have claimed might well have to be paid back as well. So it's important to know that you're on a path that's going to stay above 16 points going forward. So as part of the application itself to BFI, you have to achieve the 16 points, but there's also additional documentation that has to be supplied. So during the development phase of the game, you can apply for an interim certificate. So that way you can claim video games tax relief before the game is finished. But when the game is finished, you then have to get a final certificate, as I say, to make sure that you don't go below those 16 points. There's some additional documentation that has to be supplied, which is budgets and actual costs to date if you're part way through, schedule template of what your planned development is, an accountant's report with a final certificate, which is just an audit of the costs that have gone through for the game itself. You have to supply a copy of the final video game, a script of the game, and then depending upon, there's a couple of rules, golden points rule and undetermined points rule, where if you rely on certain sections, you have to meet certain criteria in order to gain those points. So there's some complexities in the scheme there. Now, all of this goes through an online portal for applications and submission of documents. It's a BFI portal, and they are the arbiters of whether they agree whether you pass or fail and issue the certificate out to you. Now, as I say, you must have that certificate before you make any submission to HMRC, because without that certificate, you cannot make a submission to HMRC. So timescales wise, there are some certain key dates as part of your development of the video game. So initially, you'll be going into concept development, which is where you're looking at storyboarding, themes, looking at your basic animation, how's the game going to function. So it's early stage development costs. Now, they are ineligible to claim against your game until you get to a point where it's a proceed date, and that's the date at which you decide that this game is commercially viable and you want to carry on development of it, and you're therefore intending to supply it to the public. After that, all core development costs are eligible to be put through to the claim. So the earlier you make that proceed date, the more cost that can be included. Now, there is a fairly common element to video games. So when you get to the point where you are ready to release it, you might go through early access, and there might be limited release of that game, not to the general public, but to a number of individuals for testing purposes. And that can still, where it's a limited supply, that can still be eligible cost-wise. Until you get to the point where what they call a release date. Now, the release date is not when you start supplying the game, it is when the game is ready for supply. So it doesn't necessarily have to be released, but it's in a state that you are happy that if you started to supply it, it would be suitable for the market. And that's the point at which, after that, any further maintenance costs are no longer allowed. So you have to then be, obviously be fairly cognizant of that. Now, going forward after that, you might then decide to actually develop the game further. And this has to be not just some tweaks or some modifications or some debugging, but it has to be significant game development. And it might be looking at a different platform, in which case you can then go back into core development costs that can be incurred as part of that. And obviously after that, commercial exploitation costs, marketing costs, distribution costs are ineligible. So they're the key stages of the kind of journey of a game. Now, the benefits to you as a company that are developing the game, then what you get is a 100 enhanced deduction of profits on the game. So, for example, you might spend £100,000 on core development, or you might, £150,000 on total development, of which £100,000 is core development. In which case you then get an enhanced deduction on your profits of that £100,000. Now, if that pushes you into a loss-making position, then it's advisable to cash that in, because as a profitable business, you'll get back 19% of your enhanced deduction value. But if you cash it in, you get 25% back, which is kind of a no-brainer. And as I say, you can offset profits going forward in the game, enhanced expenditure. Now, there are quite a lot of intricacies in the scheme. It is quite a complex scheme to run through, both from the point of view of understanding and putting the BFI application in, understanding the rules of what can be, to gain your points, but also for the HMRC submission. So obviously, you need to be able to separate the UK in EEA costs from the rest of the world. You must separate the game development, and you have to, with HMRC, you have to treat each game as a separate trade. So each game has its own profit and loss account that you have to account for as part of all the costs that you've incurred. And that's quite important. That actually runs as a cumulative profit and loss, not just on an annual basis. So that makes the scheme quite complex to run. The enhanced uplift value varies depending upon the percentage of your costs in the UK and EA and the rest of the world. Cashing in losses to be separated between attributable and non-attributable. So what I'm talking about there, non-attributable is where you just spend the £150,000. You know, that's the total cost that you actually spent, and that's non-attributable. And actually, you can't use that against the benefit in your P&L for your trade. You can if there are other costs within the business, non-game related, but all you can use against the P&L and the benefits of cashing in and reducing corporation tax bill is the attributable, which is the enhanced value, which is the £100,000 that I talked about earlier as an example. So that makes it quite complicated. And obviously, if you're running a number of games, then each one has its own P&L cumulatively, and that has to be calculated for the life of the game. As I said earlier, you must apportion costs depending upon location or where costs are on a reasonable basis. You know, HMRC are not expecting down to the penny, but you need to have some kind of reasonable apportionment method of how those costs are distributed. So in summary, you need to be clear on who the VGDC is, the Video Games Development Company. Because there can only be one per game, it is really important to understand, well, who is that going to be? You know, if you've got an investor into the game, the investor might say, well, they want to be the VGDC, in which case they can elect to be the VGDC, but there can only be one for the life of the game. Is the game going to achieve the 16 out of 31 point certification with BFI and stay above that for the life of the game as well? Can you achieve the minimum 25% development costs in the UK and EEA? And can you clearly identify the game's release, date you agree to proceed, and potentially the release date as to when it is ready for supply? The BFI certification application process takes 28 days, but also you need time to prepare that before it goes in as well. So please give yourself time to prepare. As I say, it's best to cash in losses. You know, if you've got generated losses per game, then you can get 25% return cashing in those losses, or in the future, it's worth 19% against your corporation tax bill. Each game developed by this treats as a separate trade with its own P&L. You know, so you have to clearly identify what costs are for which game. And obviously, if you've got subcontractors or employees that are working on 2 or 3 games at once, then you need to be able to reasonably apportion those costs between those games as well. It's non-competitive funds, you know, so if you're eligible and you can demonstrate that you're eligible to claim, then those funds are available there for you. And as I said, you can go back 2 full years on core development costs. And so it's a great way to fund your business going forward and your development costs, but it is a retrospective thing. Now, what I would like to do now is, you know, if there are any questions for myself, then I'll take a couple of questions before I hand over to Gavin, and Gavin can talk about the supply, talk about the service offerings that Barclay can give you. So I've got no questions. So what I will do is I will hand on to Matt to go on to his presentation. Oh, sorry, Gavin, for his presentation. Sorry.
No worries. Perfect. Thank you, guys. So I'm Gav. So I lead sort of business development nationally for the Barclays Games team. So I'll just take you through. I'll set up my presentation quickly. promise you I'll keep it swift, because no one likes to hear a bank talk for very long. So give me 2 seconds. There we go. Perfect. Hopefully you guys can all see that. I'll just put it in full screen. There you go. Perfect. Cool. So Barclays as a whole, we've been supporting the wider creative industries for 40 years now. So we're sort of the only high street bank that has always had a creative industries team and focus of how we, and that kind of specialist type of support that we can give. And sort of about 3 or 4 years ago, I started looking at sort of games as a sort of a separate. It was always just kind of put together with everything else. So with TV, film, music, marketing, everything, all the sort of main creative subsectors. But given obviously the nature of what was happening in the industry, we thought it was important to separate that from sort of just have kind of creative industries and then sort of games and esports. So we set up the games and esports team to really have a sort of key focus on sort of what the industry needed, what are their pinch points, and what we could bring to the table to add value. So we started working with people like Yuki and Games Republic. So we probably spent 12 months just kind of learning more about the industry, what people needed from us, and how we could take that forward. Because we didn't want to just sort of jump straight in and be like, hey, we're Barclays, we understand the whole industry. So it might not come down as well. So they were really supportive. We attended a lot of different events. We spoke to a lot of developers and people within the industry. And I guess it came down to sort of 3 kind of main areas that we wanted to focus on. So, having an understanding of the industry. So when you're talking to us or, in a bank, that you can have an actual conversation about, what you're doing, not be greeted with a blank look or, that typical, oh, is it gambling you're doing? Not, when people hear the word gaming. So we wanted to make sure that there was that level of understanding. So, we could, again, have that meaningful conversation and add value. The second one, which is probably most important, is the network. So bringing people to the table like TBAT, that can provide that sort of very niche and very specific kind of advice and support with things like video games tax credits. But it's also sort of introducing other parties, whether it could be publishers for developers, investors, or anyone providing another type of service to the industry. Who can we sort of bring to the table, that again, that's going to add value to your business that we might not be able to directly support with. And the third one was, I knew that at some point the conversation of funding within the industry was going to come up. So I created a video games tax credit loan for Barclays, and again, I guess that's some of the areas that I'm going to focus on today. So I guess that this is just kind of a general overview. As I said, a team of specialists that can support you. External network, sort of different funding options. Again, we're not going to be precious, whatever we need to do to bring to support a business that is going to help them grow. I think, we're not going to be, oh, if we can't do it, no one can. We'll always try and find an option for you. And because we think, we want to see the industry grow. So I said, we'll make sure we do anything we can to make sure that happens. And then funding, so releasing of, capital to developers and advance of the BDTR. So here's an example, I guess, of how we should do that. Obviously, we've just gone over, I guess, the criteria for claiming that back, sort of as part of your year-end audit. So if you have spent X amount of money in there, so in this example, we spent sort of say £10 million on your game, 80% of which could be on a rough aspect, according to HMRC, could be qualifying spend. 25% of that is then available for a VGTR claim, and then we could, of which that would be around £2 million, and we can lend up to 90% up front. So we could do that sort of way before you've actually put that claim in. So we could look at your spend to date. We would look at your interim BFI certificate, get an opinion letter from an accountant that basically says, this is what you spent, this is the qualifying spend and what the expected tax credit will be. And we do 90% just to allow 10% buffer for any sort of discrepancies, or in case it doesn't come in quite exactly the same amount that was stated. Very unlikely though, given that obviously if we're lending at a point in time, you're going to continue to spend money on that game, so the likelihood is the claim at the end of it will be much higher. I think the reason why I wanted to do this was, normal bank funding is all, it never, it doesn't always fit every industry. And I think in the creative sectors, it doesn't always fit, I guess, the normal business model. So, and also, we don't ask for things like personal guarantees, or charges over properties or anything like that. We take a charge over the tax credit. So it's a very niche kind of product. And obviously with HMRC technically paying us back, it's not the worst debtor to have. So we can obviously take a view and try and be a bit more flexible. We could look at it based on future spend. I think if we knew that there was funding there to be spent, we could do it in line with your spend, so we could draw it down in stages. So I guess one, that could work out cheaper as a whole, so you're not paying interest on money you don't need straight away. And two, it's more of a sort of a gradual trickle through of funding to the business to kind of keep things moving. So the main times when I've been supporting businesses with this is usually between investment rounds. So if there's a 6-month gap, if they're going from from series seed round to a Series A or Series A to Series B, obviously that doesn't take 5 minutes to do. So sometimes I'll look at sort of just bridging that cash flow, looking at their runway and sort of getting that funding in, and it just sees them through until they've got that sort of larger chunk of money coming in from either a publisher or investor. So I think it's key to understand this was we did this last. I think we just wanted to make sure we had an option in case it could be useful. But there's also many other ways that obviously that we could be able to support businesses. I think some of the key areas that have come up alongside tax credits are sort of foreign exchange. If you're doing work for hire, delays with paying invoices, or, getting money back from those invoices, everything like that. So we're trying to always develop the offering that we have and making sure that it's as up to date for the industry as possible. In terms of sort of supporting that wider industry growth, we've got Eagle Lab sites, so incubator sites all across the UK. And we have 6 or 7 games bias locations at the moment, looking to grow that. So we will have one around here in Glasgow very soon. And the key aim of these Eagle Labs is to kind of offer a very different type of service. It isn't really about the banking. It's about different types of programs. It could be funding readiness programs. It could be sort of mentoring. It can be used as a workspace, so you can actually work alongside other games companies, so that and build your network. Few kind of events we do, so things like Games Collective, so we try and get people together, obviously over the last couple of years virtually, to discuss sort of certain pinch points that everyone's having, so people can learn and share from each other. And it's just it's a very different type of offering that that we can give, and it doesn't necessarily involve the banking, which I think is nice, because it just means that we're flexible and we're just giving different support for different companies based on their current situation. We support the industry, everything from startup all the way up to sort of the large corporate companies. So this isn't just all we want to deal with is the large publishers. Every business that I'm supporting at the moment is sort of an indie developer at those early stages, and we're just trying to find those pockets of support that we can give to them. And so far, it's been really welcomed. I think we've got the infrastructure, not just in London, across the UK, to do that. Cool. I mean, I did say I'd keep it short and sweet, guys. So look, we know it's such a niche industry, and we know that it's only going to keep growing. So we want to obviously we're always keen to get feedback, always keen to hear more about what else we can do. We're trying to do things very differently from a Barclays perspective, but we are also obviously a very large bank. So we can look to try and open doors and sort of make some changes where we can to make sure that you're getting the most value out of any relationship you have with us. But yeah, my details will be shared around at the end and to everyone afterwards. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. So I wanted to give everyone a nice overview of what we do, and so hopefully that's given you that today.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Okay, so there's lots of benefit out there. There's lots of support. The schemes themselves are quite complicated. So if you're looking for assistance or some advice, then I'll pop up my contact details up here, and I'm happy to kind of pass on Gavin's at the end of the session. Now, are there any questions that have come in from anybody? If you want to put on your microphone, then please feel free, or post them into the chat. So, yes, we will be passing the slides around. We'll circulate both the Barclays and the TBAT ones, and add a couple of comments sort of say that it was all well explained. So thank you very much. Glad it was useful. And yes, and please feel free to get in contact after the session and see how we can help you.
Definitely, and thanks again, Ian, for organising this. And I think that it's really important that people are aware of the type of support that's out there. And I think that the video games tax credit is it's an amazing sort of scheme set up by the government. And sort of in the conversations I have with the BFI, there don't seem to be as many people using it as maybe expected. I guess it's the newest one out of all the tax credits. But I think if people can sort of find the support and get that money back, it's a real you don't need to borrow against it. The main thing is that you are claiming it back, and you're getting that money for the work that you're doing and the opportunities that you're providing to the UK economy, and that you're getting that rebate at the end. So this is what sort of people like Ian and the team are here for, to help with the sort of the nitty-gritty bits of that and to sort of make sure that you'll get that support to make that claim. So yeah, it's a really big deal.
One question for you, Gavin, come in.
Yes.
For Eagle Lab location, any plans to open in the northeast?
Yes, I'll send a full list around of our locations. So yeah, we've got quite a few scattered around the whole UK. We do have coming up to over 30, so I can't remember every single one, sorry. But I will send around, I'll send to you, Ian, to share with everyone. Sort of
sure.
The main
And I know that some of the Eagle Labs actually specialise in particular sectors. So I deal with Lincolnshire, they specialise in the agri-tech industry. So specific locations are specific to particular sectors where there's a sector focus in that area. So, if there's any particular...
I think the overall sort of funding readiness programs and programs available are still kind of there for anyone who's who needs it as well. Some of those mentoring programs that we offer as well, you don't even need to be necessarily a lab member. So again, if there's something that's particularly of interest, I'll share a link that you can send around, Ian, and it will just kind of give some of that flavour of what's available. But again, we wanted to make sure it was as flexible as possible. So you kind of didn't feel like you were committing everything just to kind of get this type of support. So yeah, I think it's a great initiative, and we're going to keep growing it. So yeah, watch this space.
Okay, all right. Thank you for everyone for their time, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks very much. Thank you.